Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Hashtag Real Talk with me, your host, Aaron Bragg, or more commonly known as the guide through the crazy, foggy world that is information security. Today is the first of a technical series that we're going to do. So, one of the requests that I've gotten lately is, while we do the high level podcast topics, every once in a while, people want us to dig in and get a little bit deeper dive on a relevant topic. So today's topic is a great title from a recent GurCon presentation, which shout out to Jamie and Chris for putting on an awesome conference. Monsters Under Your Bed, Mapping the Dark Web with Python. And my guest today is Zach Smith. Zach was the presentator, was the presenter at CloudCon for this track. Zach is a security engineer and consultant for a major retail company. So I want to be quiet for a minute. Zach, introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us how you got into the crazy world that is information security.
Yeah, sure thing. Like you said, I'm a security engineer. I've been in security for 5 years officially now out of college, but then doing small things before then. Started in IT when I was in high school and did any projects I could get my hands on. Loved computers, loved coding. So Python, PowerShell, anything. As soon as I found out I could automate half of my life, I fell in love. So that's how I got into it. And then, of course, like most nerds, video games was the start of everything.
Yeah, we won't talk about how long I've been playing video games, which is really neat. So before we jump into the first talking point, um, how did you, just more of a general question about you, how did you pick Python, right? So going back in time, my first language was Basic because I was always more art inclined than technology inclined. And, I liked computers just because, they had video, to your point, they had video games. And if the more I learned about computers, the cooler video games I got to play. And I started off with basic. So how did you get the exposure to Python?
When I was going through system administration classes or anything like that, PowerShell and Python were the two big ones that they talked about because when you're working on servers, it's usually that or it's Bash because you're working with a Linux server. And then I started to work more with Python just because the syntax is easier to understand. And the one benefit compared to all languages that are used on servers or any system administration work, PowerShell works on Macs, it works on Windows, it works on Linux. So you can write one piece of code that will work across your environment. And that is probably the biggest benefit that I've found because early years of my career outside of college, I worked at Tanium and you write scripts that you want to run across your environment. And there's going to be several different computers, several different operating systems. If I can just write once and write a little bit of Python code that runs everywhere, much easier. And I'd rather be lazy than work a lot. So
No, you're not being lazy. You're working smarter, not harder, which is kind of interesting because I learned something new today. Every time that, I hear PowerShell, because again, I'm a casual programmer, former front end web developer. The extent of my backend code is with PHP, Python based. Still love PHP and dabble at it from time to time. I didn't know that Python, or sorry, not Python, PowerShell was cross OS. I learned something new. I really thought in my naivete that PowerShell was just Windows only. So I learned
yeah.
something new today.
So Python is the most open platform. It's used on all three. There are some ports to other operating systems, and that's where you get it's not near as functional as normal PowerShell, but you can use it on other platforms like Mac. I think there is a port for Mac, and I've used that a few times. Although Python is much better for Mac.
All right, so let's dive right in because we got a lot to cover. So your presentation at GurCon, right? One of the things that I liked about it was you at the beginning you talk a little bit of the importance of understanding that whether you like it or not, you meaning as a company or a person, the dark web is there for better or for good. A lot of people think it's all bad, but obviously, There are good parts of it, but you get scared, you want to jump into it. My company is a small company. I don't have time, I don't have time to the time or money, to really dive into it at a tool level. So you had talked a little bit. Why is it important that you at least have a basic understanding of the dark web, especially if you're in the small and medium business space?
So dark web, it's where our adversaries hang out. It's like the chat rooms of the nefarious actors. So we all have people who are going after our networks. We all have threat actors in some way. Even if you're a small business, it may not be as large of an attack surface, and you may not be targeted near as much as a large company, but you're still targeted. And those people that are targeting you, they're likely hanging out on the dark web. They're buying malware there. They're selling your data there. So you want to look at the dark web specifically to see, all right, what are you doing on the dark web? And then maybe you are a small apparel company and I'm an apparel company, I am PCI. These are the type of people that target me. These threat actors have historically targeted PCI small business. So what type of malware do they use? Maybe you can find the hash of that malware and then you can start scanning for it. Or you can see they are commonly using identity-based threats and exploiting those. So knowing how your threat actors behave and then figuring that information out is kind of imperative to figuring out how you can defend yourself from them. So instead of blanket, let's defend ourselves from everything out there, you can start to kind of adapt your security strategy to who you're actually fighting. Because small business, you don't have a lot of money. It's best to put that money towards what you really need. And what you really need to do is defend yourself from the attackers who are attacking you, not who are attacking someone across the world. So that's kind of what's most important. And then, yeah, you can detect the attacks after they happen, scan for any compromised email addresses, any of your specific intellectual property. It's a very smart place to hang out if you want to detect attacks as they're happening or after they've happened.
Excellent. No, that does put it in perspective, especially because I guess one of the upsides and downsides, right, to a small and medium-sized business in that regards is if you can pivot a little bit, right? So you don't have the big bucks, say, of a major healthcare system to do some of that grunt work for you, but you could probably pivot a lot quicker, right? So to your point, if you're seeing something happening, then you can quickly, pivot to try and help with that. Whereas if you're like a major healthcare system, right? Like we have processes that we have to adhere to, especially on our insurance wing, right? There's actually regulation around, okay, what are the things you're doing to say roll out code or other things, and you have to adhere to that. Whereas a smaller medium business, you're able to pivot a little bit more, even though you might not have, the kind of money or resources, as the bigger companies. So tell me a little bit about that, right? So doing some of this stuff that you're about to talk through, it sounds like you're making a good case for like build versus buy, right? So talk to me about why some of the, free open source, libraries and systems out there can do a comparable job, right, to some of the high dollar ones. So talk to me about the pros and cons of like, the high dollar solutions out there, and how then, maybe a sub item in that is how for a relatively small amount of money you can get, a good percentage of coverage, right, by building your own. So be quiet for a little bit.
So out there are several different Intel providers you can use. I'm not going to name any in this podcast because I don't want to accidentally talk trash about it. But there are several out there, and a lot of them are great. A lot of them are not. And one, as a small business, you don't have the time and or money to either spend looking into every single Intel provider to figure out which one is great for you, or waste money and pay for the wrong one. That's probably the worst case scenario is you pay for an Intel provider that gives you not great Intel. And until you've worked with them, it's kind of hard to tell how great that Intel is. So that's one con is just it's kind of a black box until you actually buy it. But um, outside of that, you have to be okay with what intel they provide you. And a lot of the time, what they can give you is kind of strict. Like they have their very specific process and how they go out and get it. And they have specific data points they'll look for, like maybe your internet or your domain name, anything like that, your email addresses. They can find that. But maybe you're looking for a very specific intellectual property you don't want to share with a Intel provider. You kind of want to keep that private because
Good
it's your
point.
IP.
I didn't never thought about that. Good point.
Yeah. So
Sorry,
it's
go ahead.
no, you're good. Just want to make sure that you're scanning for everything you want to scan for. And if you're working with an Intel provider, you often won't be able to scan for everything you want, which is why I'm privy to at least having part of your scanning and your Intel solution be custom, because custom means you have control. Custom means that you can scan for what you want, how you want, when you want. If you want to scan more often than they scan, maybe an Intel provider only looks once a week for compromised email addresses, but you want to look 3 times a day for some reason. I don't recommend it, but you could. And by scanning 3 times a day, you'd be going against how they work. And now you can do that quite more often and recognize a compromised email address much faster. So maybe you want to scan for your admin credentials more often. Maybe you want to scan for something else more often. Maybe you want to scan for IP, passwords, or IP addresses. Anything like that that your Intel provider doesn't scan, you can just go out and do it. So small business, you might not be able to afford a massive Intel company that can often go into tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not sure about you. I don't have budget for that because I mean, I don't. But I know a lot of larger businesses don't want to dedicate all that time. But with the new open source tools that are coming out, new ways that you can do it, and something I'll probably talk about a little bit more is the AI. You can generate code a lot faster than you used to. So coding new tools is going to become a lot easier. So if you wanted to work on your own tool, your open source ones that are available, you can do a lot more to get basic intelligence than you've been able to do in the past. And it's more approachable and more free than ever.
And sometimes in this case, free is good. Okay, before we start like actual journey and you start getting into some of the technical elements, what are some safeguards, right, that you want to do out there in the fringe, right? Because a lot of people obviously want to avoid it, right? I don't need to see this particular type of, material, but to your point, it still needs to be done. So there's other people that, want to be able to know, right, but don't want to get their hands dirty. I guess not their hands dirty because you're not doing anything wrong, but it's more like how do you shield your eyes, right, so you don't see some of the things that you can't unsee once you've seen them. So, what safeguards do you want to do when you're out there in the fridges?
Yeah, some dark web is a dark place. You're right. You want to avoid seeing things and you want to avoid certain threat actors. You don't want to talk with them if you don't have to. You don't want to do anything that could put you in danger. So things you can do a lot of the time out of the box when you download the Tor browser, which is the browser used to access the Tor network, which stands for the onion router. But it by default typically disables JavaScript. If you don't disable JavaScript, you're going to have anybody can just run JavaScript when you load a website. And not sure about you, but if you've ever tried like a penetration test, if I can get my JavaScript to run on your system, I'm a happy man. So I'm guessing the hackers would be too. But disabling JavaScript using the official Tor browser, not something that you found on GitHub or anything like that, using the actual Tor browser to make sure you're not downloading something that will just screw your system up. Or if you do download the official Tor browser, making sure that you're also keeping it up to date because they often find security bugs in the browser. And if you don't keep it up to date, you're going to come across new bugs that haven't been updated yet, and then you're going to have more security issues on your hand. So that's kind of like the technical ways you can stay secure, but also just being cyber smart. You're on the dark web, there's bad guys out there just like it is on the internet. It's just more dense of a population. So you're going to want to make sure that you don't download anything you don't trust. And when you're on the dark web, that means don't download anything unless you know who it's coming from, which you almost never will. And also, just like the internet, don't share any private information with anyone you don't know. Because if you're going to go out there and start sharing your social security number, I don't know what to say. Good luck. You're going to have a great
I
next
like
few
like to
years.
think you apply a little bit of common sense if you're
Yeah,
out there,
don't
but
do
you
that.
never know.
But those are just a few of the ways. And I'm sure if you Google, there are several articles out there on best practices, but those are the big ones that come to mind.
Okay. All right. We've set things up nicely. Let's go ahead and dive in and talk a little bit more about how how you approach this, how you would set up Python to do certain automations. You talked a little bit about like IP addresses, potentially scanning, compromised emails, crypto, stuff like that. So where do you start in a journey? So we got we got our Linux set up, right? We got Tor ready, we got, basic libraries ready. What's kind of the first thing we want to do?
So once you've installed Python on Linux box, it comes with a lot of out of the box libraries you can use. Some of those are like some of those would be like regex, anything like that for pattern recognition inside of the text of a website, or a few others. But there are going to be some that you want to install. So there are a few that popped up to mind are like requests, which is something used for handling AP or HTTP requests, or something called Beautiful Soup. So if you've never used Beautiful Soup, it is a web parsing utility. It is what I used to make a very basic version. And by using Beautiful Soup, you can pull down a website and then look for different HTML elements within the website and say, I want any HTML elements with the ID of X. So once you've spent enough time on a website, like inspecting the website for specific elements. Maybe you want the header every single time a website gets pulled down. So you would say, go to this website, pull the header, let me know what it is. Maybe you want to scan all of the body for a specific regex pattern, and that regex pattern will find your IP. So first thing would be getting those libraries installed. And once you have the dependencies that you want to use to actually scan, Beautiful Soup and um, Beautiful Soup being one of them, then you should be good to start. And often I to start out a new project when I don't want to write the code, I go to something like Copilot. There are several different tools out there that can help you write the starter code. And that's something that's becoming a lot more approachable. Like I said, in the future, I don't think you're going to really need too much of a syntax skill. You're going to need more of a mentality of a developer because when I was originally writing out some proof of concept code for this, I said, I want you to go out to these websites. I want you to scan and use Beautiful Soup for that. I said how I want it to do it. I told it I want it to be recursive. So if you find an onion link on a website, you would just scan that onion link as well, and then recursively go through each website until you kind of hit a dead end or however many levels deep you want to go. So doing that, you can use AI to write a good amount of your code at first, or if you don't want to write your own code, there are a few different repositories you can use on GitHub, and they'll all have their own setup instructions depending on which one you use. I'm working on one of my own, but there are several out there. So that's kind of what I would do to start is figure out what approach you want to use, whether that's make your own or use open source. And from there, you can find a lot of different information. But Linux box, Windows box, whatever you want to use.
Good question on that part. So, one, I didn't even think about that. Like when we looked at, so obviously my healthcare system, which again, I always keep forgetting to do disclaimer, opinions and thoughts expressed in this podcast are mine and do not necessarily reflect my awesome employer. I'm supposed to do that at the beginning, but I forgot. Okay. Um, you talked a little bit about like using AI. One of the things that we for our AI Center of Excellence that we created about a year and a half ago, that was one of the original first use cases, right? Is using this for creating code or helping assist with that. I didn't think about it. I mean, it's not that I'm being naive. It's just one of those scenarios where I didn't do a deeper dive into this particular instance, using that as a tool to make up for some of your, technical items that you may conceptually know, right? But you're not fluent in. I didn't think about that. So you talk about less about code in the future and more about syntax. Before we get into the next steps, do you want to explain a little bit a little bit on that? Because I knew enough about regex to be dangerous, right? But now you're able to have, like Chat GPT or something else really truly process it. So it's more explaining it. Do you want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah. So regex patterns, since you brought it up, that is one of the first things I really dabbled with GPT messing with it about. So I would feed in like, here are a few samples. I want one regex pattern that will match all of these, but I don't want you to just say this or this or this. I want you to make it as compact as possible so it's more efficient. And that's one thing you can do is if you don't understand regex syntax, which there are several people out there that will understand it one day and then the next day they completely forget it because it is the most confusing thing in the world. So it makes sense that we're not going to remember the syntax, but eventually we're not going to have to remember the syntax. I've written Python code and then I just wanted to see how it behaves in Rust. So I said, here's my Python code. Here's how it works. I don't know a thing about Rust. Can you make it for me? And then it would rebuild my entire application in Rust. So you don't need to know the syntax of future programming languages, which is the most probably one of the more annoying things about being a dev is new programming language comes out, executive wants you to rebuild the entire platform and whatever new stuff is coming out. Okay, let's see what AI can bring up. And then once you have working code, it's much easier to make small changes to that because you're a dev, you can kind of recognize what code is doing, even if you don't know the full syntax. And from there, you can make small changes and slowly learn the language or rely on AI all you want. So that's one way that you can use it. Regex is another. And then if you are building regex patterns for scanning the dark web, please make sure you think it through before you throw in your intellectual property and say, hey, scan for this. It's not the best idea. So unless you trust your AI provider, but I know a lot of people just use Copilot in their browser without any license or anything like that. So just be smart.
Yes, and I guess a little advice for listeners that they may not know. So here's a little free tidbit of information. You can set up obviously different environments to use Copilot in a closed system, right? But what a lot of people don't know is that the second you use the add-on, say in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code stuff, what have you, that sends those queries out to the general pool, right? So to Zach's point, you lose control at that point. And the reason why they do that, right, is because most of the if you're not doing something proprietary, right, you do want it to go out to the general collective hive hive mind Borg for you Star Trek fans, right? Because it's going to return more results that could be relevant as opposed to that closed coding ecosystem to maybe where you're just sharing it with people inside your own environment. So that's a good point. All right, so we got the library stood up. You've got your initial queries, so to speak, telling it that what you want to do. What are the next steps? How do you go about executing this?
Yeah. So you can definitely schedule the script to run, assuming you built out like a Python script with Copilot or something. That's what I did. So going from that angle, I set up a cron job so it ran regularly and then made sure that it was scanning for the information I want. So when I originally built it, it was scanning for a few keywords, but those keywords were just examples. So I dropped in my regex patterns to the list that it was scanning for and started finding some information. And then from there, I had to go find websites that I wanted to scan on. So I scanned a few websites that you just find on like dark web directories you can find on the clear web, being just the normal internet. But if you're looking for specific stuff, you can look at dark web search engines. There are several out there. One's called Excavator, unintended, and there's a few other ones. But if you start scanning those and then you put in your search terms for those websites and then use that eventual link that you get for that search results webpage, you can kind of hijack their search functionality because they've built out a great tool to search the dark web, and people often drop new onion links into that search engine so that people can find their onion service for whatever they're doing. It's most likely illegal, but that's where your friends hang out, lack of friends. So you don't want to have any attackers that are hiding in websites you don't know about using search engines. You can find those different places they're hanging out, and then you can scan them. So I would often say I was looking to find information on Gmail as an example, which is going to be a very big keyword. But if I put Gmail into a search engine, you'd see like the Google results page similar, but it's the Tor search engine. And then for that search engines page, I would actually put that in as one of the seed URLs that I start scanning from. And from there, I would scan all of the results that come up as a match for the keyword I originally searched for. And from there, branch out my search to look for the other keywords. So maybe I'm looking for executives' emails specifically, and I'm scanning for that daily. Maybe I'm looking for intellectual property related to Gmail. Anything like that, you can scan the pages that come up on those search engines, knowing that a lot of those search engine results may not be active anymore. Tor services fall off all the time because either they got rid of the service or FBI got rid of the service, one of the two. And if the FBI got rid of the service, you can know that your threat actor is now going to go somewhere else because most likely they were not the one that got popped. And now you just need to go find where they're hanging out now. So that's how I found a lot of the different places that I was originally scanning. And you can probably use a similar technique. Also, you can just use the dark web directories and start from there, knowing if you're going to the search engines, that is going to be one of those times when you're going to want to shield your eyes a little bit. You're going to see sponsored results, and they are very, very dark web type of results. So make sure you are understanding of what you're clicking. And if you click something, try to close your browser as fast as you can because you most likely won't want to see what you see. And speaking from experience, it's not always that fun.
Well, and we'll talk about that a little bit at the end because that is one of the talking points. Um, so on the off chance that some of the listeners have made it this far, let's do a little education moment. This little 1 minute segue won't be for the more advanced people, but for some of the people that are listening that do want to learn a little bit more. Um, Talk to me and a two-part question. One, a little bit of, you know, dark, a difference between a dark web engine, right, and something say like Google or DuckDuckGo. And then talk to some of the people about, the concept. What is a seed URL? So, part question for you.
So CDURL is more just a word I was using, not necessarily an official word, but you can use it as that if you want. So the way Google works is it would scan the clear web and find any URLs that it's looking for, find information on your internet or your website, and then scan from there. It can find a lot of these just based off of looking through ClearNet domains, HTTP, but Tor hides a lot of your stuff. So if I have a Tor service and I don't tell you the address and I don't tell anyone the address, it's going to be very hard to find it. That's kind of the whole purpose of Tor or any of the other dark web protocols. So, what's the purpose of a search engine? It's to make it so people can find your Onion service. That's what dark web search engines are for. It's kind of a given in the internet, but if you're on the dark web, it's not a given. You can hide pretty well. So, by getting onto the search web or the search engine for the dark web, you actually have to give your URL. With Google, you have that option like, hey, here's my URL. Can you scan it? But that's only to update your results. Often, Google will find you anyway. They will have you show up in the search results. If you want to show up in the search results on the dark web, you have to give your Onion service to the admin. And they have forms for that. It's not all that complicated to do, but that's the only way you show up there. And these forums or marketplaces where your adversaries are going to hang out, they will want all other adversaries to know this is where you can buy malware, this is where you can sell personal information. So they're going to advertise on those search engines. And that's why you scan for those. That's just where they're going to hang out. Seed URL would be that search engine, like I said, if we're using that as a seed URL, that's the first URL that I manually went out and grabbed. And then from there, I'm going to scan that one URL and find several other URLs in there. So it's the seed of all the things that I'm going to find, but you can branch out to hundreds, thousands of URLs that you find on the Onion network. And from there, you can just build a tree, for example. That's why it's called seed. It looks like a tree once you map out from there.
So I always wondered that, right? So those of listeners that aren't old school web developers like me, the days of Netscape Navigator, really early days of the web. Um, I always wondered like how you would handle like web crawlers, right? So for those listeners that may not know, so a web crawler, like you said, is going searching known, so to speak, parts of the internet. You create a file called the robots.txt file. And, for a peon web developer like me, you give it general commands. You're like, hey, you can say, this is a little bit about our site, scan this stuff. You can also tell it what directories you don't want it to crawl, right? I mean, it still technically could unless it's behind a login. Um, but I always wondered how onion sites work in that regards because you want people to find you, but you only want certain people to find you. So I'm assuming that, onion sites, right, don't exactly have robot.txt files in there. So I always wondered how they advertised, so to speak, without being able to advertise in a traditional sense. I guess, I mean, any follow-up thoughts on that, or is that pretty much how it works for us laymen's?
Yeah, and I'm not 100% sure that all Onion servers don't have a robots.txt. I think I've seen some that do, and search engines on the dark web will use them. So the only difference, Google would be able to find your server and then they'd be able to see your robots.txt. Tor search engines cannot find your website unless you tell them about it. So once they find your website, they can then go ahead and scan using your robots.txt file, just like Google. But if we're on the dark web, do you really think they're going to stop there? No, they're not. So robots.txt isn't exactly the best practice for the dark web because no one's going to listen to it, but it scans exactly like Google. The only difference is the discovery aspect. One is completely hidden until you say, I don't want to hide anymore. And one is, hey, I put a website on the internet, Google will find me within a week. That's pretty much the only difference.
Okay, all right, we're on to the next step. So we've gotten all those parts done. You got the cron job, you're doing automations, you got, your searching data points that you want to do. What's kind of the next step? Do you run this for X amount of time, or do you personally start using some of the information you ingested? How does that typical workflow look?
Yeah. So depends. There are just like Intel providers that you can pay for from the market. You can have these results once they come up. If you have a result that you care about, you can modify your script to send an email. And I've seen some people do emails, some people just send it to their SIM, anything like that. So kind of how you would any EDR or any response that you get from hey, this is potential threat. We need to worry about this. Exact same thing. You'd just be able to code that. And a lot of open source tools come with those built-in integrations. So whether you want to send it to your SIM, send it to your email, send a text, a Slack notification, whatever you want, it all works. That's what
Sorry,
you
don't mean to interrupt, but I don't want to lose my train of thought. Can you give it different levels at that point, right? Like, okay, you've scanned it, yep, we found a compromise, we found an email address. Okay, all right, that's important. I want to know that. I want to know where it's at, but maybe that's not high enough level alert. Can you set it up to respond differently depending on like the metadata you've selected?
Yeah, as long as the system that you're scanning with has access to your criticality information, whether that be hey, I found an email and this is bad. It's compromised. They're actively using it. Not great. I found a CEO's email. It's compromised. That's bad. So you'd want a higher level of severity. And if you have, like, for example, for that list, you'd want a list of all executives or VIP emails. And if one of these is compromised, we're going to have it be a much higher severity than if a retail associate who's selling clothes, if their email is compromised. We don't really care. Like, we care, but we're not going to break down all doors to make sure that that CEO replaces their password. Anything like that. And then also, like you're saying, with systems or anything, if we have a dev system that gets compromised, maybe we don't care as much as if a production website gets compromised. Any information like that, if you have that criticality info and you build it in or make it accessible to the scanner that you're using, then you can obviously make a different flow. So if else, if what the whole conditional flow for making so that the error or the threshold for what goes to your sim, what goes to your text. Maybe you only want text for critical events. You can program that all into your tool, or I'm not sure of too many open source tools that have that built in yet, but we can probably use the Python and a few different ways of doing that.
So that lends me to the question, it's kind of a chicken and egg question. So if you if you don't if you don't answer it in the most awesome way, there that's no problem. So should you have your first level of triage workflows done before you jump in, or are those things going to change so much? It's almost like, hey, maybe these are the top three things, the top three data points that I want to alert on. These are the just top three levels. I really want to get in there and start getting my hands dirty, so to speak, knowing that I'm going to pivot and, change some of those or, by adding or removing. Or is it something to where, yeah, you know what, before you start this journey, take a little bit of time, dig out your response workflows, then jump in knowing that you're going to have to tweak them. What would you recommend on that?
So if you have a dev system, fantastic. Most companies do not have a dev sim, especially in small business. But anything like that, if you have a dev system where you can dump your alerts to, that means, hey, just turn it on. Let's start scanning and see what comes up. We'll have a ton of noise. We understand that. But it is much easier to figure out what filtering you need or what criticality levels you need for different types of alerts if you have actual data, not just sample data of what you think it's going to look like, but you want actual data from the dark web. It's best to start scanning and then go from there, filter down the noise. That's typically what I see whenever you buy, like, CrowdStrike, for example, or anything like that. A lot of time you just turn it on and you're going to see a ton of events, but only after that can you start filtering what goes to your SIM. So thinking of it the same way, you want to turn that scanner on, get as much data as you can without overwhelming your teams, because we see so many different alerts. Alert fatigue is a real problem. We don't want to just blow up our SOC analyst box. We want them to know this is coming, have a filter set. So, hey, this came from this box. We know this is test data right now. Make it so that you can see that, but get help looking at it and see, like, hey, this doesn't matter. We should set up a filter for this. This doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. This is really important. We should set that to a high criticality. So it's best to get scanning, because once you've done a few scans, you'll know, hey, this is good data, but we do not need this. You can set the filters after the fact.
Which brings me to something from earlier in a conversation when you talked about like starting off and using ChatGPT. Is it going to be interesting to see what companies, obviously bigger development and research, research and development budgets come into play, like you talk about, but it sounds like you would be able to use an LLM to start noticing or picking up patterns that you may not recognize, right? Because to your point, you're going to have a ton of potentially a ton of unfiltered data, right? That does seem like there's an opportunity at that point. Can you take that larger data set right and drop it in a large language learning model. I need more coffee. Sorry. um, to really pick up and maybe notice certain trends. Is that something that you try and do naturally as weed out false positives, so to speak? And are you finding success doing that, or just it's not quite ready for prime time?
So I have not tried plugging an LLM into this type of thing, but I could see where that would become a potential use case in the future. Um, Again, knowing that your alerts may contain IP and you don't want any of that to be leaked to an LLM you don't trust. But I could see where an LLM could be used to scan or to look at all of the different results, which is going to be a lot of noise, and just tell it, give me the stuff that is imperative to my business and ignore everything else. I believe there are products doing that. I think CrowdStrike's intelligence has something similar. I don't think that's hit any open source tools yet, but with enough dev experience, which I know is not often something that is at small business, but with enough dev experience, I think you could figure something out, and hopefully the open source tools will be getting there in the near future.
Excellent. That's funny. At this point, we might have to reach out to CrowdStrike and say, "Hey, let's sponsor an episode. We're talking about some of your stuff. Let's get some money to charity." In all seriousness, though, because I know we're running up against a little bit. So we've done our alerts. We're pulling the initial data back. You've done that first level of filtering. What would be the next step to mature it, right? So, you've walked through all the scenarios. What are you cycling through so you get better at doing this stuff?
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, like spiders or crawlers can't get into credential protected web services. So if I have a marketplace that is protected by a password, it's going to be pretty difficult to scan that. Maybe we build out a kind of custom plugin for that website. Say, hey, this is the website. And a lot of dark web marketplaces actually use the same template. So you can use that plugin on a lot of our marketplaces. The template you can actually find on GitHub. They just use it from there. But you can say, hey, this is this template. So I want to scan it using this. Here's a credential. Let's actually create an account on that marketplace. None of this is illegal. You can create stuff as long as you don't do anything illegal. So go out there, create an account on that, and then build it into your scanner so that now it's going to use those credentials and sign onto the marketplace. Then it can access the internal aspects of the website. So that way you can see what information is for sale, what other threat actors are out there that you may care about, anything like that. That's when you can start getting into those websites. Else, you're gonna just kind of want to look at what's out there. One thing that I've thought about doing, haven't done it yet, when you're on the dark web, you're going to see links to Telegram, which is one of the weird things in the world because Telegram is a weird mix of ClearNet, dark web. You won't often come across it, but there will be Telegram chat rooms, and those are often connected to marketplaces. That is where they're going to be selling data, and they'll just be talking like it's a Tuesday because often it is a Tuesday. And they're just going to be talking like, "Hey, I got some information for sale. It costs this much. This is what it is. This is the company that we got it from. Who wants to buy?" And then they will say, hey, hit me up in private message. We'll go from there. And if you see, hey, say I work for Google again. Hey, I got this massive dump of terabytes of information that I found at Google. Anyone want it? I'm selling it for $100. $100, that's a deal. But from there, you want to say, all right, we have an issue. We found a terabyte data dump on this Telegram channel. We should start caring. So figuring out not just dark web HTTP scans that you want to do, but you find other information and what other services, what other platforms can you start scanning? Because that's going to become something that you're going to want to know about. But that's as your program matures, as your platform matures. It's not right away. Right away, you just want to get the basic intelligence that you can gather because it's easier to start from one than it is to start from zero. 0 to 1 will be the hardest part.
100% correct. It's amazing how some leaders think you can go right from crawl to run right? Or 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 think they can run without not even doing a walking step. So, in all seriousness, though, what are some of the mental aspects of doing this type of work? How do you manage the pressure, right? So, how do you help those that are getting it that do need to know if their data's out there, but to your point, avoiding the seedier parts or some of the stuff that you can't unsee. What do you personally do to avoid those and how do you handle that so that it doesn't take kind of a mental toll on you?
Yeah, so it is definitely a dark place, and you want to be careful when you go out there. But kind of like how you with a lot of SOC analysts, one, you don't want to be doing this every single day of your life. You don't want to just hang out on the dark web, look at the darkest place on the internet, and make that your usual. So if you have a team of 7 SOC analysts, it's probably a good idea, not only for their skill set to mature, but they should probably rotate through that so that you can protect yourself from the ongoing mental health issues. So you're going to see some dark stuff. Maybe everyone else can help share the load. That's one thing you can do. But also, I mentioned the seed URL, and that comes with one great benefit that is if you scan a seed URL and you find other URLs on there, those other URLs, you're already scanning them. You don't need to go there. So they're probably going to be dark places, especially if you don't manage your scanner to not scan those sponsored results. Those sponsored results are definitely not a website you want to go to. You will see things that you will never unsee, and making sure that you get those results automatically. You scan it and parse it automatically. You will only care about that website if your company is mentioned there, which it won't be because they could care less about your company. They're doing horrible things that are completely unrelated. So that's a great thing about automated scanning. Making sure everything is automated keeps you off the browser and just in your scripts. And I like looking at code. I don't like looking at evil. So that is one great thing that you can do. Outside of that, you can just make sure that you have somebody to talk to. And most likely you'll see something you don't want to see. You're going to have to find those seed URLs. You're going to see at least mentions of things you don't want to know about. So there is no way you're going to get off the dark web having found great seed URLs that you want to scan without knowing how horrible people can be. So if you're ever feeling like you're going to have a really bad night because you've seen some horrible things, you got people to talk to, at least I hope you do, go talk to them. And if not, you can reach out to almost anyone in security. They'll understand what's going on and they'll talk to you. In my experience, people in security care and they'll take care of you if you need help.
100% correct on that assumption. We do like to help, and shouldering the load is a big thing. All right, so I like to end the podcast on positive notes, and I feel like I have to extra do with this one, right? Because it's such an important topic, but to your point, it's such a mind-numbing topic as well. What are you most hopeful for as we go into 2025, regarding your work and maybe you're just the advances that you're kind of seeing? What are you most hopeful for?
Ooh, good question. So I'm hopeful, like you said, the LLM stuff. I think if we have AI either helping us generate more code, the quality of the code that is put out by Copilot or any other tools, I keep mentioning Copilot because that's the free one that I use. I'm cheap, but the quality of code that's put out by them, and then also the ability to parse scan results and do more that we've done in the past, that's going to make it so small business can do more than they've ever been able to do. And I think that is huge because I think everybody can admit small businesses are getting hacked more and more as time goes on. So we need to make it so that they can fight back better. And AI will be a great tool in everybody's tool belt to do so. And I think that is the biggest thing. Now, I feel incredibly cliche in saying that AI is one of the things I'm most excited about. But um, more people getting on dark web. That's what I'll go with. More people getting on dark web to see what they can see out there outside of AI. I think that's something that people need to do.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. We are at time. Zach, thank you very much for taking the time. Again, your presentation at GurCon was awesome. And I know we talked about we went off script a little bit, but I think it was relevant because I may have some listeners that even though they're going to get lost, they just like to listen and learn. So I appreciate you being patient with me as we went off script a couple times.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, everybody. As always, I like to end the podcast with stay safe out there. But with this particular topic, if you are searching the dark web, please, please, please be safe out there and listen to all the great tidbits of advice that Zach had. All right, everybody, have yourself a wonderful day.